Just 3 days ago, I watched my son Michael push his own father down our basement stairs, and now I know the 20-year secret that's been destroying our family from the inside. My name is Susan. I'm 62 years old, and until this week, I believed I had raised 3 wonderful children and built a life worth celebrating. I was a high school English teacher for 37 years, the kind of woman who never missed a parent-teacher conference and always had fresh cookies cooling on the counter when my kids came home from school. But everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. What I discovered is that my eldest son and his wife have been slowly poisoning my husband Robert with insulin injections for the past 2 years. They convinced him he was diabetic when he wasn't, then systematically administered doses that were making him weaker, more confused, and closer to death with each passing day. The plan was simple and horrifying. Make his death look like natural diabetic complications, while they collected on a $2.3 million life insurance policy they had convinced him to increase just months earlier. For 35 years, Robert and I built what I thought was a beautiful life together. He was a contractor who could fix anything, the kind of man who would drive across town at midnight if one of our kids needed help. We raised 3 children in the same 4-bedroom house where we still live today. Michael, our oldest, at 38, Sarah, 35, and David, our baby, at 32. Our kitchen table was the heart of our home, where homework got done, problems got solved, and every Sunday, without fail, the whole family gathered for dinner. Those Sunday dinners were sacred to us. Robert would spend the morning making his famous pot roast, and I would set the table with my grandmother's china. Michael would arrive with Jessica and their 2 young children, Emma and Tyler. Sarah would bring her husband Tom and their daughter Sophie. David, still single but always the life of the party, would show up with flowers for me and jokes that made everyone laugh until their sides hurt. The grandchildren would run through the house, their laughter echoing off the walls while the adults caught up on the week's events. Christmas mornings were magical. We had traditions that went back decades, opening stockings first, then gathering around the tree and burn. "Feeling lately?" she would ask when she called. "Has he been to the doctor recently? You know, men his age really need to stay on top of their health." When Robert mentioned feeling tired after long days at work, Jessica would immediately suggest he get his blood sugar checked. "My uncle had diabetes," she would say, "and the early symptoms sound exactly like what Dad's describing." I remember the exact moment she crossed a line, though I didn't recognize it then. We were at Sarah's birthday dinner, and Robert had gotten up to use the restroom. Jessica leaned across the table toward me and lowered her voice. "Susan, I've been thinking. You look really overwhelmed lately. Maybe you should take a break from hosting these big family gatherings. I could take over some of the responsibility." The comment stung, because I prided myself on being the family organizer, the one who kept everyone connected. But Jessica's tone was so sweet, so concerned, that I pushed down my hurt feelings and thanked her for caring. The suggestions became more frequent. "You should rest more, Mom," she would say when I mentioned feeling tired. "Let other people handle the family stuff for a while. You've done enough." She started volunteering to drive Robert to his doctor appointments, claiming it would give them bonding time. She offered to pick up his prescriptions, to organize his medications, to help him remember when to take them. What I saw as daughter-in-law devotion was actually something much more sinister. Michael's behavior changed too, though it was subtler. He became intensely interested in our financial planning in a way that felt intrusive. "Dad, you and Mom need to make sure all your legal documents are updated," he would say during our Sunday dinners. "Have you reviewed your life insurance lately? Your will? These things are so important for the family's security." Robert, always the responsible provider, appreciated what he saw as his son's mature concern. He updated everything Michael suggested. The conversation that should have been a red flag happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Michael called while Robert was in the shower. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking about Dad's health situation. You know, if something happens to him, you're going to need financial support. Have you guys considered increasing his life insurance coverage? I could help you navigate the process." The call felt strained. "Is family only. Leave right now." The entire restaurant seemed to go silent. Sarah gasped. David stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "What the hell, Michael?" David said, but Michael just stared at me with this calculating expression. Jessica placed her hand on his arm, not to stop him, but almost like she was proud of him. "Michael's right," she said quietly. "Maybe Susan should sit somewhere else tonight." I felt like the ground had opened beneath me. This was my family, my children, my life, and suddenly I was being excluded from it. Tom grabbed my arm gently. "Come on, Susan," he said. "We're leaving." All of us. Sarah was crying, gathering her purse and Sophie's coat. David was still standing, his face red with anger, demanding explanations that Michael refused to give. We ended up at Denny's, of all places, trying to process what had just happened. "He's been under a lot of stress at work," Sarah kept saying, but even she didn't sound convinced. David was furious. "That wasn't stress, Mom. That was cruel. That was calculated." But I defended Michael because that's what mothers do. I made excuses, blamed work pressure, financial strain, anything but the possibility that my firstborn son could look at me with such contempt. What I didn't know then was that Michael and Jessica were already planning my husband's murder, and I was becoming an inconvenience to their timeline. Every concerned question about Robert's health, every suggestion that I step back from family responsibilities, every push toward updated insurance policies was part of a methodical plan to isolate us and position themselves to benefit from Robert's death. I started noticing the glances between them during Robert's dizzy spells. When he would suddenly feel confused or weak, they would exchange these quick looks across the room. Jessica would immediately spring into action, checking his blood sugar, adjusting his medication, playing the concerned caregiver, while Michael nodded approvingly. What I interpreted as teamwork was actually coordination in a murder plot. David noticed it too, though he didn't realize the significance at the time. "Mom," he told me weeks later, "Michael's been asking me weird questions about Dad's health history. Like really specific stuff about his medical records, his doctors, when he started having problems. It felt like he was fishing for information." David's instincts were right, but none of us understood that had nothing to do with his supposed diabetes. "Susan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I'm the biggest fool who ever lived." I set down the towel I was folding and really looked at my husband. Robert had always been strong, the kind of man who could work a 12-hour day and still have energy to help the grandkids with their homework. But over the past 2 years, he had become a shadow of himself. His hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. He would get confused in the middle of conversations, losing his train of thought completely. Some mornings he could barely get out of bed, claiming he felt like he was drowning from the inside. "What is it, honey?" I asked, patting the bed beside me. He sat down heavily, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. "I don't have diabetes," he said. The words hung in the air between us like a confession of murder. I never had diabetes. Michael and Jessica convinced me I did, but I don't. My first reaction was relief, which seems insane now. "That's wonderful news," I started to say, but Robert held up his hand to stop me. "No, Susan, you don't understand. They convinced me to lie to the doctors. They coached me on what symptoms to describe, what to say to get insulin prescribed. They told me it was preventative medicine, that if I started taking it now, I would never develop full diabetes like my father did." The room started spinning. "What do you mean they convinced you to lie?" Robert pulled out a manila folder from under our mattress, his hands shaking as he opened it. Inside were medical records, blood test results, doctor's notes. "I've been keeping copies of everything," he said. "Look at these numbers, Susan. My blood sugar has never been high, not once. Every single test shows completely normal levels." I stared at the papers, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Month after month of normal glucose readings, normal A1C levels, normal everything. "But you've been taking insulin shots twice a day for 2 years. "Jessica gives them to me," he said, and his voice broke. She said she was a nurse before she married Michael, remember? She said she knew exactly how to manage freely down his cheeks. Because when your child tells you they're worried about your health, when they say they've researched your family history and they're scared you're going to die like your father did, you believe them. When your daughter-in-law volunteers to help manage your medication because she has medical training, you feel grateful. I thought they were saving my life. Robert showed me Jessica's computer search history that he had somehow accessed. Page after page of searches for insulin overdose symptoms, diabetic emergencies, how much insulin is fatal, signs of insulin shock. Mixed in were searches for accidental death versus murder, life insurance payouts, and how long does insulin stay in system after death? She's been researching how to kill me and make it look natural, Robert said, and I've been letting her inject me with the murder weapon twice a day. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place with horrifying clarity. Jessica's constant questions about Robert's doctor appointments were so she could stay ahead of any real medical concerns. Her insistence on managing his medication was to control the dosage and timing of the poison. Michael's sudden interest in our financial planning was to ensure they would benefit maximally from Robert's death. The life insurance policy, I said, remembering Michael's insistent phone calls about increasing our coverage. $2.3 million, Robert confirmed. They convinced me it was responsible planning for your future security. Michael said you would need substantial support if something happened to me. He made it sound like protecting you. But if you die from diabetic complications that you don't actually have, they get the money. And you get nothing but grief, Robert said. Susan, I think they want me dead, and I think they want it to happen soon. Jessica's been increasing my insulin doses. She says it's because my condition is getting worse, but I think she's trying to cause a fatal episode. I looked at my husband, this man I had loved for 35 years, and realized that for 2 years, our son and his wife had been slowly murdering him while pretending to care for him. They had weaponized his trust. His parental things have been lately. We want to make it right. His voice carried that familiar warmth I remembered from his childhood, the tone he used when he wanted something but was trying to sound generous. We've booked a long weekend at the lake house for all of us. Just the 4 of us. No distractions, no other family drama. We need to heal this rift and get back to being a real family. The timing felt like a punch to the stomach. Less than 12 hours after Robert's confession, after we had discovered their murder plot, they were inviting us to an isolated location for a reconciliation weekend. Robert and I exchanged glances across the breakfast table, both of us understanding immediately that this was not a peace offering. That sounds lovely, I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. When were you thinking? This weekend, Jessica's voice came through the speakerphone. I know it's short notice, but Michael and I both got the time off work and the weather is supposed to be perfect. The lake house has been in Michael's family for generations. It's so peaceful there, so private. Just what we all need to reconnect. Private. The word sent chills down my spine. The lake house was 3 hours north of the city, surrounded by dense woods, with the nearest neighbor a mile away. Cell phone reception was spotty at best. If something happened there, no one would hear us scream. Jessica's already planning to take care of all the meals, Michael added. She insists on handling Dad's medication schedule too, since she knows his routine so well. You two won't have to worry about anything except relaxing and letting us show you how much we love you. After we hung up, Robert and I sat in silence for a long time. The trap was so obvious now that we knew what to look for, but it was also perfectly designed. Refusing the invitation would seem suspicious and might accelerate their timeline. Accepting it was walking into what could very well be our deaths. Over the next 3 days, I watched Michael and Jessica prepare for the weekend with the kind of meticulous attention usually reserved for military operations. When I stopped by their house to bring Emma and Tyler some cookies, I found Jessica packing a cooler in their garage. Inside, I glimpsed at least 6 insulin vials and a dozen syringes, far more than any diabetic would need for a 3-day. Low, urgent tones. When they saw me, their expressions would shift instantly to bright smiles, and they would start talking about mundane things like the weather or what groceries they needed to pick up. On Thursday evening, I watched Jessica researching something on her laptop while Michael cooked dinner. I positioned myself where I could see her screen and felt my blood turn to ice. She was reading articles about accidental drowning statistics and heart attacks in diabetic patients. One tab showed a medical website detailing insulin shock symptoms and timeline. Another displayed information about sudden death in elderly diabetics. She was researching how to make Robert's murder look like a natural death. That night, Michael suggested something that confirmed our worst fears. "You know what would be really therapeutic?" he said during a phone call. "A boat ride on the lake, just the 4 of us. No distractions, no phones, just honest conversation about where we go from here as a family. Dad always loved being on the water, and I think it would be the perfect setting for us to really talk through our problems. A boat ride on isolated water, far from shore, far from help, far from witnesses. It was perfect for them and potentially fatal for us. I made a decision that probably saved our lives." After Michael and Jessica left that evening, I called David. I couldn't tell him everything without sounding paranoid or insane, but I could give him essential information. "David, your dad and I are going to the lake house with Michael and Jessica this weekend. I want you to have the exact address and our schedule, just in case." I gave him detailed information about where we would be and when we planned to return. "If you don't hear from us by Sunday evening, I want you to call the police and send them to check on us." "Mom, is everything okay?" David asked. "You sound worried." "I'm probably being silly," I lied, "but humor an old woman. Promise me you'll check on us if we don't call Sunday night." "I promise," he said. "But Mom, if you're really worried about something, maybe you shouldn't go." "We have to go," I said, and I meant it. Running away would only delay the inevitable and might put David and Sarah in danger too. Just remember what I told you. Friday afternoon, as we loaded our bags into Michael's car, I felt like I was attending my own funeral. Jessica was cheerful and sugar. Every question felt like a countdown to murder. When we finally arrived at the lake house, I understood why they had chosen this place. It was beautiful, but completely isolated, surrounded by thick forest with a long graveled driveway that would make it impossible for anyone to approach without being heard. The lake stretched out behind the house, dark and still, with no other buildings visible on the shore. "Isn't this perfect?" Jessica said, breathing deeply. "So quiet, so private. We could scream our heads off and no one would hear us." She meant it as a joke about being able to relax and be loud, but the words sent terror through my entire body. That first evening, as Jessica prepared dinner and insisted on handling all of Robert's medication, I realized we had less than 48 hours to either expose their plan or become their victims. The isolated lake house that was supposed to heal our family was actually going to be the scene of a carefully planned murder, and we had walked right into their trap. Saturday afternoon, Michael announced it was time for our therapeutic boat ride. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the water. Jessica had packed a picnic basket and made a show of bringing Robert's afternoon insulin shot, explaining to us how important it was to maintain his regular schedule, even during vacation. "The boat's perfect for a serious family conversation," Michael said as he helped Robert down to the dock. "No distractions, no interruptions, just us talking honestly about our future together." The boat was a modest fishing vessel, big enough for 4 people, but small enough that any struggle would be immediately apparent to everyone on board. As Michael started the engine, I noticed Jessica positioning herself close to Robert, while I was seated at the opposite end. They had thought this through carefully. We had been on the water for about 20 minutes when Jessica announced it was time for Robert's insulin injection. "Right on schedule," she said brightly, pulling out a syringe and vial from her bag. but as I watched her prepare the shot, I could see that she was drawing up far more insulin than usual. The syringe was nearly full when it should have contained only a small amount. "That looks like a lot," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Dad's been having some blood sugar spikes lately," Jessica replied without looking at me. "The doctor increased his dosage." Beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. His speech became slurred as he tried to tell Michael he was feeling dizzy. "Oh no," Michael said, his voice filled with fake concern. "Dad's having one of his episodes. We need to get him to shore quickly." But instead of turning the boat toward land, he steered us further out into the center of the lake. "We're too far from shore," he announced. "This is bad." This is really bad. That was when I realized they were not just going to let Robert die from the insulin overdose. They were going to push him overboard and let him drown while he was semi-conscious and helpless. Jessica moved toward Robert, ostensibly to check on him, but I could see her positioning herself to push him over the side of the boat. Robert was barely conscious, his head lolling as the massive insulin dose wreaked havoc on his system. "We need to get him in the water," Jessica said urgently. "Sometimes cold water can help with diabetic shock." It was a lie, but it would sound plausible to investigators later. I knew I had seconds to act. As Jessica reached for Robert, I screamed at the top of my lungs. "Help! Someone help us!" My voice echoed across the empty lake, but I kept screaming anyway. Jessica lunged forward to push Robert overboard, but I threw myself between them, grabbing my husband's shoulders and pulling him toward me. Jessica and I struggled physically, her nails raking across my arms as I fought to keep Robert in the boat. Michael abandoned any pretense of concern and moved to help Jessica. "She's ruining everything," he snarled, his mask finally dropping completely. He grabbed my arm and tried to throw me overboard, but I managed to grab the boat hook that was mounted along the side. In desperation, I swung the heavy metal hook at Michael's head. It connected with a sickening crack, and he stumbled backward, blood streaming from his scalp. He lost his balance and fell, his head striking the metal edge of a seat as he went down. The boat rocked violently from our struggle, and Jessica, who had been leaning over the side trying to push Robert into the water, lost her grip and fell in with a splash. She surfaced immediately, gasping and panicking. "I can't swim!" she screamed. "I can't swim well!" With Michael unconscious and Jessica beginning. The Coast Guard arrived within 25 minutes, their searchlight cutting through the gathering darkness as their rescue boat approached ours. The EMTs who boarded found Michael unconscious with a severe head wound, Jessica hypothermic and in shock from her time in the water, and Robert in the throes of what appeared to be diabetic crisis. What they didn't expect was a coherent 62-year-old woman with a story that would turn a medical emergency into a criminal investigation. "Ma'am, we need to get everyone to the hospital immediately," the lead EMT said as they transferred Michael to a backboard. "Can you tell us what happened?" "My son and his wife just tried to murder my husband," I said clearly. "They injected him with a massive dose of insulin to cause fatal hypoglycemia, then planned to push him overboard and make it look like an accidental drowning during a diabetic emergency." The EMT looked at me like I had suffered a head injury myself. "Ma'am, you've been through a trauma. Let's get you checked out at the hospital and we can sort everything out there." But I wasn't going to let shock or disbelief stop me from protecting Robert. "Check his blood sugar," I insisted. "Then check how much insulin is in his system. My husband doesn't have diabetes. Those medical records I brought will prove it. And check Jessica's bag. She packed enough insulin for a week-long trip when we were only supposed to be here for 3 days." The ambulance ride felt like a nightmare. Robert was semi-conscious, his vital signs stabilizing as the glucose tablets continued to work. Jessica, wrapped in emergency blankets, kept insisting she had been trying to help Robert when she accidentally fell overboard. Michael remained unconscious, which was probably the only thing preventing him from coaching her on their story. At the hospital, everything changed when Dr. Martinez saw Robert's blood work results. Dr. Martinez was a thin, serious man in his 40s who had been working emergency medicine for 15 years. He pulled me aside after examining the lab reports with a frown that deepened with each number he reviewed. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "your husband's insulin levels are dangerously high, but his glucose levels suggest he received emergency glucose treatment recently. This pattern is very unusual for a diabetic patient. Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" I handed him the manila folder Robert had been keeping, the one with 2 years of medical records showing normal blood sugar readings. "My husband doesn't have diabetes. Symptoms you're describing: weakness, confusion, tremors, and eventually, if the dose was high enough, coma and death." "That was their plan," I said. "They were going to kill him with insulin overdose and make it look like he drowned during a diabetic emergency." Hospital security arrived while Dr. Martinez was examining Jessica's bag at my request. Inside, they found 6 vials of insulin and 12 syringes, along with printed articles about insulin shock and drowning statistics that Jessica had apparently brought as reference material. "Ma'am, this is enough insulin to treat a dozen diabetics for a week," the security officer said. "Why would she carry this much medication for a 3-day trip?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Detective Lauren Walsh arrived at the hospital at 2 in the morning. She was a woman in her early 50s with silver hair and tired eyes that had seen too many family tragedies to be easily shocked. Her initial skepticism was obvious as she sat down across from me in the hospital waiting room. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're claiming your son tried to murder your husband," she said, pulling out a notepad. "That's a very serious accusation. Can you walk me through why you believe this?" I started with Jessica's computer search history, which the hospital's IT department had helped me access before the police arrived. Page after page of searches for insulin overdose deaths, perfect murder methods, how to stage accidental drowning, and life insurance payouts for accidental death. Detective Walsh's expression shifted from skepticism to interest as she reviewed the printouts. "These searches span several weeks," she noted, "and they're very specific to the situation you're describing." "There's more," I said, pulling out bank statements that Robert had secretly copied. "Michael and Jessica are facing foreclosure on their house. They have credit card debt exceeding $60,000. They convinced Robert to increase his life insurance policy to $2.3 million just 6 months ago." Detective Walsh spent the rest of the night interviewing hospital staff, reviewing evidence, and coordinating with other agencies. By morning, she had enough probable cause to request search warrants for Michael and Jessica's home, computers, and financial records. The life insurance investigator, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, was even supposedly diagnosed with the condition that would eventually kill him. David arrived at the hospital Monday afternoon, distraught and confused. When Detective Walsh interviewed him, he provided testimony that further supported our case. "Michael had been asking me weird questions about Dad's medical history for months," David said. "He wanted to know about Dad's doctors, his medications, his daily routines. He said he was worried about Dad's health, but now it sounds like he was gathering information for something else entirely." Sarah's testimony was equally damaging. "Jessica kept asking me about Dad's schedule," Sarah told Detective Walsh. "When did he take his medication? What time did he usually eat? Did he ever skip doses?" She said she wanted to help Mom take better care of him, but she was asking for very specific details about his daily routine. The forensic analysis of Robert's hair samples revealed chronic insulin exposure over a 2-year period, proving that the poisoning had been systematic and long-term. The medical examiner confirmed that the dose Jessica had administered on the boat would have been fatal within 2 to 3 hours without intervention. But the most damning evidence came from Michael and Jessica's phone records. In the weeks leading up to our lake house trip, they had exchanged dozens of calls and text messages discussing the plan, timing, and making sure everything looks natural. One text from Jessica to Michael read, "After this weekend, everything changes. No more waiting, no more delays." Another message from Michael to Jessica said, "The lake house is perfect. Private, isolated, and Dad always loved the water. It will look completely natural." Detective Walsh also discovered that Michael had been researching boat accident statistics and drowning survival rates for elderly men with medical conditions. His internet history showed searches for "How long can someone survive in cold water?" "Heart attack risk factors in diabetics," and Accidental death versus homicide determination. Jessica's laptop revealed even more disturbing research. She had been studying perfect murder methods, undetectable poisons, and how to avoid murder charges. One particularly chilling search was for grieving widow behavior and how to act innocent after spouse's accidental death. The financial investigation revealed that Michael and Jessica had already been making overwhelming medical records, financial documents, computer search histories, phone records, witness testimony, and forensic analysis all pointed to a methodical, premeditated murder plot that had been in development for 2 years. Jessica tried a different approach, claiming that Michael had manipulated and threatened her into participating. He said if I didn't help him, he would leave me and the children with nothing, she told Detective Walsh during her interview. I was scared of him. I never wanted to hurt Robert. But her own search history and active participation in researching murder methods contradicted her claims of being a reluctant participant. On Wednesday morning, Detective Walsh arrested both Michael and Jessica on charges of attempted murder, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. The evidence was so comprehensive that the district attorney's office immediately began preparing for what would become one of the most shocking family murder cases in the county's history. As I sat beside Robert's hospital bed that evening, watching him regain his strength as the insulin finally cleared from his system, I realized that our nightmare was far from over. The legal battle ahead would be long and painful, but for the first time in 2 years, I felt like we might actually survive it. The trial began 8 months later, in a packed courtroom filled with reporters, curious spectators, and family members still struggling to understand how our Sunday dinner gatherings had hidden such calculated evil. Michael and Jessica sat at separate defense tables, their lawyers having successfully argued that their interests were too conflicted for joint representation. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rebecca Stone, had assembled what she called one of the most comprehensive evidence packages in a family murder case she had ever seen. Robert's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the trial. As he walked slowly to the witness stand, still recovering his full strength after 2 years of systematic poisoning, the entire courtroom fell silent. His voice shook as he described trusting his son with his life, believing that the daily insulin injections were keeping him healthy when they were actually killing him slowly. I loved my son, Robert said, looking directly at Michael for the first time since our arrest. When he told me he was worried about my health, when Jessica said she wanted to help manage my medication because she had medical training, I felt grateful. I thought I was lucky to have children who cared so much about keeping me alive. Methodically presented the evidence we had fought so hard to gather. Dr. Martinez testified about Robert's medical records and the impossibility of his supposed diabetes diagnosis. Detective Walsh walked the jury through the timeline of searches, purchases, and planning that proved premeditation. The life insurance investigator explained how Michael and Jessica had positioned themselves to benefit maximally from Robert's death. But it was the phone records and text messages that truly sealed their fate. Prosecutor Stone read aloud conversation after conversation where Michael and Jessica discussed the timeline, making it look natural, and finally being free to live the life we deserve. One particularly damning text exchange occurred just 3 days before our lake house trip. Jessica, are you sure this will work? Michael, positive. Dad trusts me completely, and Mom will be too upset to think clearly. By Monday, we'll be free. Jessica, and rich. Michael, and rich. Jessica's defense attorney attempted to portray her as a victim of Michael's manipulation, claiming she had been coerced into participating through threats and emotional abuse. She took the stand in her own defense, tearfully explaining that Michael had convinced her their financial situation was desperate and that his parents would be better off dead than struggling with medical bills. I never wanted to hurt Robert, she sobbed. Michael said it would be painless, that Robert wouldn't suffer. He said we were actually being merciful, ending his suffering before diabetes destroyed his quality of life. But the prosecution destroyed her credibility during cross-examination by presenting her independent research into murder methods and her active participation in planning Robert's death. "You researched perfect murder methods for weeks," Prosecutor Stone said. "You practiced giving insulin injections. You packed enough insulin to kill 10 people. Does that sound like the behavior of someone being coerced?" Michael's defense was even weaker. His attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that insulin medication errors happen frequently in elderly care. But when Michael finally took the stand, his arrogance and lack of remorse shocked even seasoned courtroom observers. "My parents are old," he said coldly. "They were going to die anyway. At least this way my children would have showed no reaction to his conviction." But Jessica collapsed, sobbing, as the reality of her situation finally hit her. Judge Harrison sentenced Michael to 25 years to life for attempted murder, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Jessica received 20 years to life on the same charges. In delivering the sentences, Judge Harrison said, "This court has rarely seen such a calculated betrayal of family trust. The defendants systematically poisoned and attempted to murder a man whose only crime was loving his son unconditionally." Robert's recovery was remarkable once the insulin poisoning stopped completely. Within 6 months, his strength returned, his mental clarity improved dramatically, and he was back to working part-time at the contracting business he had built over decades. The tremors disappeared, the confusion lifted, and the man I had married 35 years earlier slowly emerged from the fog of systematic poisoning. We moved closer to David and Sarah, buying a smaller house 2 miles from David's apartment and 15 minutes from Sarah's family. Sunday dinners resumed, but they were different now. Smaller, quieter, more precious. We talked more openly about everything, understanding that secrets and assumptions had almost destroyed us. 6 months after the trial ended, Robert and I established the Roberts Trust Foundation, dedicated to helping elderly abuse victims and educating families about the warning signs of financial and medical exploitation. We speak at senior centers, police training sessions, and community groups, sharing our story to help others recognize the red flags we had missed. I became a certified advocate for elder abuse victims, working with social services to investigate suspicious family situations. Every month I receive letters from people who heard our story and recognized similar patterns in their own families. Some have uncovered financial exploitation, others have discovered medical abuse, and a few have prevented what could have been murders disguised as natural deaths. Last month, Robert and I celebrated our 37th wedding anniversary, surrounded by David, Sarah, their families, and grandchildren, who now understand that protecting vulnerable family members is everyone's responsibility. As I watched Robert help our grandson Tyler with his math homework, using the same patience and love he had shown our children decades earlier, I was reminded that evil had tried to destroy our family, protect other families from the same betrayal. In the end, the love that made us vulnerable to their manipulation became the strength that allowed us to save others from the same fate.